Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi. Siding with the Demon King's army would make survival much easier for him, especially when his ultimate goal has always been to stay alive. But at the same time, he knows exactly what he is dealing with, a demon, and not just any demon, but Aeger herself, the succubus commander, and because of that, he forces himself to resist, pushing back against her influence and struggling to regain control over his own thoughts, barely managing to break through her mental manipulation. Aeger immediately notices that he has shaken off her high-level magic, which surprises her, making her wonder if the reason he managed to resist is because she is currently using a borrowed vessel, and she starts to complain about Shen, mentioning that she only made a contract with her because of her constant whining. But now she regrets that decision, clearly dissatisfied with her current host. As she continues to ramble, Geomas suddenly starts laughing, unable to hold back his amusement at what he sees as her ridiculous and nonsensical behavior. And the laughter creates a brief silence as Aeger stares at him, trying to process what he just did, completely unprepared for such a reaction. Without saying another word, Geoma pulls out his sashimi knife, and instead of giving her a direct verbal answer to her offer of becoming her servant, he swings his blade through the empty air with a single clean motion, and bluntly tells her to fuck off. Aeger smirks at his complete lack of manners, clearly amused, and as that expression settles on her face, flames begin gathering around them, spreading through the air as if responding to her will. Geoma doesn't hesitate even for a second, and cuts straight through the flames she casually sends his way, while Aeger, completely unbothered by the exchange, lets out a bored yawn as he works to dodge and counter her attacks, almost like she isn't taking him seriously at all. But even then, Geoma isn't fighting at his full potential yet, and the moment he accelerates, he moves fast enough to actually close the distance and attempts to cut her down, forcing Aeger to dodge and leap backward while breaking into manic laughter, clearly entertained rather than threatened. The longer the fight continues, the more intrigued she becomes, and despite initially offering to make him her slave only half as a joke, she now genuinely starts to want him. Curious about just how far his abilities can really go, deciding to push things further, she releases more of her power all at once, unleashing multiple fireballs toward him in rapid succession, yet Geoma slices through every single one of them without slowing down, carving a path straight through the wall of flames as he charges directly at her. His skills only grow sharper and more dazzling as the fight progresses, and instead of overwhelming him, it only makes Aeger more impressed, to the point where as he closes in, she is actually forced to turn and run, something completely unexpected, while he relentlessly chases after her without letting up for even a moment. At this point, Geoma has clearly gone beyond normal human limits, while Aeger, despite being a Legion commander, is still adapting too slowly to her current state. Even though several minutes have already passed since her descent into the human world, Geoma manages to catch up to her and immediately goes for a decisive strike, aiming to bury his knife into her back, and for the first time, Aeger feels genuine concern at how fast he has become, realizing that he closed the gap far quicker than she anticipated. Their clash results in a massive explosion that tears apart the ground around them, sending debris flying in every direction, and as the smoke begins to clear, Aeger is revealed standing above Geoma, calmly holding back the knife that was just about to pierce her moments earlier. She comments on how impatient he is, asking if he is in such a hurry, while casually telling him that there is no need to rush, since she has all the time in the world for him. Geoma, however, is very much in a hurry, fully aware that time is not on his side, and without wasting another second, he pours all his strength into breaking free from her grip, cutting through it and immediately pushing forward for another attack. His body begins to glow with aura as he forces himself even further, determined to end the fight before his limit catches up to him, because the countdown on his painless blessing is steadily ticking towards 0, and once it runs out, he will be left completely exposed. Aeger notices this shift immediately, realizing that despite already surpassing human limitations, he is somehow still getting faster, pushing himself beyond what should even be possible. The two of them continue clashing repeatedly, their attacks colliding, and sending sparks of flame scattering across the battlefield, the intensity of their fight growing brighter and more violent with each passing second. However, as time runs out, the inevitable happens, and the moment his painless blessing ends, Gioma's body gives into the accumulated strain, leaving him completely exhausted as he pants heavily, barely able to remain standing while Ager looms over him. In contrast, she shows almost no signs of damage from the battle, aside from a heavily cut-up hand, flames flickering around it as blood drips from the wounds. She looks at her injured hand with a hint of curiosity, almost as if the sight is unfamiliar to her, noting how strange it feels to see her own red blood flowing, as if she has become human herself. And then without any effort, she activates her flames and completely heals her arm, restoring it instantly as if the injuries never existed. With her body fully recovered, she walks toward Gioma, who can barely stand upright anymore, and tells him that it would be a waste to leave someone like him as just a human. She can feel the burning determination inside him, a fire that seems to consume his entire being, and that intensity captivates her interest. Even though he lacks manners, she finds his fiery resolve appealing, and considering his age, she even believes that he might have more potential than the other boy who was prophesied to become the vessel of the past hero. Ager laughs softly as Gioma continues to glare at her with defiance despite his condition, and now that she is mostly adjusted to her borrowed body, she begins to view him differently, wondering if he might actually be the one capable of fulfilling the desires of the demons. To confirm that thought, she decides to give him one final test, wanting to see whether he truly possesses the qualities she is searching for. Ager begins gathering even more flames around Gioma, the heat intensifying rapidly as she slowly rises into the air, her presence becoming heavier and more oppressive. And while floating above him, she casually declares that if he can survive her next attack, then he passes her test. The flames around her compress and condense into a blazing sphere in her hand, glowing brighter and burning hotter than anything she has used so far. Looking almost like a miniature sun formed purely out of destructive magic, Gioma's eyes begin to glaze over as he watches her charge the attack, his body completely drained, with no strength left to even react properly, and Ager, noticing his condition, coldly tells him that he must at least endure this much, before casually tossing the blazing sphere straight toward him. At that exact moment, a figure rushes in from the side with incredible speed, leaping upward and positioning himself directly in front of the incoming blast, taking the attack head-on to shield Gioma from certain death. It is Siegfried, who arrives just in time, and as he pours all his strength into blocking the overwhelming burst of flames, he shouts at Gioma to pull himself together and snap out of his daze. Ager watches this interruption with mild annoyance, clearly displeased that someone dared to interfere in what she considered her test, and she bluntly tells Siegfried not to meddle in their battle. However, Siegfried has no intention of stepping aside, because he absolutely cannot allow Gioma to fall here, especially after witnessing the incredible potential the boy has shown. And since the old swordmaster has chosen to risk his life for the student, Ager decides she is willing to test him as well, curious to see if he can truly protect Gioma. Meanwhile, Gioma's consciousness drifts into an empty, silent space, where everything feels distant and disconnected, and the first thought that crosses his mind is whether he has already died, until he hears the faint sound coughing somewhere ahead. Slowly regaining awareness, he looks forward and sees a figure standing before him, and the first thing he notices is that where an arm should be, there is only the burning mangled stump. As his vision clears further, he realizes that the person standing there is Siegfried, the Sword Emperor himself, who has lost an entire arm while protecting him. Yet despite that devastating injury, the old man continues to stand firm, unwavering, placing himself between Gioma and danger like an unbreakable shield. Noticing that Gioma has finally regained some awareness, Siegfried tells him to rest and recover his strength for now, making it clear that he will hold the line in the meantime despite the dire situation. While Gioma, still struggling, points out that Siegfried has lost his arm only for the old man to dismiss it completely, stating that there is no need to grip a sword with both hands anyway, and insisting that Gioma should focus on regaining his strength instead of worrying about him. Ager grows impatient, watching their exchange, and calls out to Siegfried again, unable to understand how a human who has clearly passed his prime can stand against her magic like this. Since under normal circumstances, A mere human should not even be able to think clearly in her presence, let alone hold their ground. Siegfried does not respond to her taunts, and instead focuses on assessing the situation he has stepped into, recognizing that he is facing Aegir, one of the Demon King's Legion commanders, and understanding the implications of her appearance. Because for a demon of such rank to descend into the human world, a sacrifice of flesh must have been used to weaken the barrier between realms, allowing her to possess a human host as a vessel. Due to the backlash of this process, demons cannot unleash their full power while possessing a human body, but even with that limitation, they remain catastrophic threats, nearly unstoppable once they appear. Fortunately, in this case, it seems that Aegir's compatibility with Les Shen's body is not ideal, which explains why she struggled against Geomet earlier, and is now even being held back by an injured old man. Aegir, however, cannot comprehend how Siegfried is managing to resist her for this long, but she resolves that her next attack will not end as lightly as before, and with that thought, she launches herself forward again, charging straight at him, while Siegfried responds immediately, rushing toward her with his sword held firmly in his remaining hand. The two cross paths in a single swift exchange, and in that instant, Siegfried manages to sever her arm in retaliation, her flaming limb falling to the ground as Aegir lets out a scream of pain and fury. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Staring at the severed arm in disbelief, while Siegfried calmly asks if she is afraid now, pointing out that things are finally even between them. That remark only fuels her anger further, and she retaliates by unleashing an overwhelming wave of flames that engulfs the entire area, attempting to burn everything in sight. While Siegfried remains composed, holding his sword steady as it becomes infused with dense aura, preparing to counter her assault. Although he does not know the exact reason for her descent into the human world, he can clearly see the fear beginning to surface in her eyes, something she tries to suppress, and as her flames lash out toward him like a molten whip, he cuts through them cleanly, and evades the attack before instantly repositioning himself, moving at a speed that even Aegir struggles to track. Despite this, Aegir continues to underestimate him, to focus on mocking him, to fully concentrate on the fight, and because of that, she nearly loses her head when Siegfried suddenly appears beside her and swings his sword at her neck, an attack she barely manages to avoid at the last possible moment. The density of Siegfried's aura is so overwhelming that she cannot properly sense his movements, forcing her to finally take a closer look at him, and in that moment, she realizes his true identity, that he is a descendant of our own, one of the legendary heroes of the past. Even after recognizing this, Aegir forces herself to calm down before panic can take over, reminding herself that no matter his lineage, Siegfried is still just a human whose body has long passed its prime, and that there is no reason for her to lose composure over someone like him. Aegir suddenly descends into the sky, creating distance between herself and her opponents, and as she hovers high above, countless flaming spears begin forming behind her, multiplying rapidly until they fill the entire sky. Even if Siegfried is a descendant of Iran, she is confident that a body as worn and aged as his cannot possibly evade what comes next, and the sheer heat radiating from those spears becomes so intense that even the clouds begin to scatter and dissolve under the pressure. She lets out a manic laugh, clearly enjoying the overwhelming advantage she holds, while both Geoma and Siegfried instantly understand that what is coming is going to be nearly impossible to avoid, without giving them even a moment to properly react. Aegir unleashes the attack, sending a storm of blazing spears crashing down toward the ground like a catastrophic rain of fire. Despite his age and injuries, Siegfried still moves with incredible agility, stepping and leaping with precise timing as he avoids the falling inferno. His movements sharp and efficient, proving that his body may be old but his mastery has not dulled. Meanwhile, Geoma can only watch helplessly, calling out to his teacher, his body too exhausted to even stand properly, let alone join the fight. Every ounce of strength he has is being used just to remain conscious, and even loosening his grip on his sashimi knife feels dangerous, as if letting go would mean losing the ability to fight entirely. Dropping his blessing now would be nothing short of suicide. Siegfried continues navigating through the relentless barrage, dodging and weaving between the descending spears while the ground around him is torn apart by molten impacts. And whenever one gets too close, he calmly swings his sword with his remaining arm, slicing the flaming projectiles cleanly in half. Even Eager, watching from above, acknowledges his skill, though she mocks him by elevating him from a mere nuisance to something slightly more troublesome in her eyes, while still continuing the endless downpour of attacks without pause. However, Siegfried is not simply evading blindly. With every calculated movement, he has been steadily closing the distance between them, inch by inch, until he finally reaches a point where he is within range to strike. As he advances, he openly admits that demons are overwhelmingly stronger than humans, recalling how, in his youth, that realization filled him with resentment, forcing him to accept that effort alone could never bridge that gap. Eager mocks his words as he speaks, dismissing them outwardly. Yet inwardly, she cannot ignore the sheer refinement and experience behind his swordsmanship, something that continues to pressure her despite her superiority. As he draws closer, she studies him carefully, searching for an opening, and finally notices it. The left side of his body, where his arm is missing, is completely exposed, leaving him vulnerable. A smirk forms on her face as she prepares to exploit that weakness, telling him to keep talking as if indulging his final moments. Siegfried leaps into the air, raising his sword high above his head for what is clearly meant to be a decisive strike, and as he closes in, he declares that humans have the ability to grow and evolve, even in the most hopeless circumstances, and that very trait is what demons fear the most, which is why they continuously attempt to invade the human world. Just as he reaches striking distance, Eager suddenly bursts into laughter, and with a swift gesture of her hand, a spear of fire erupts from the ground beneath him, piercing straight through his foot, instantly disrupting his momentum and leaving him suspended and vulnerable. She does not hesitate for even a moment, closing the gap instantly. She places her hand directly against his chest, clearly done listening to his words, and releases a concentrated blast of fire from her palm that tears through his body, piercing his stomach completely. The attack detonates a moment later, engulfing him entirely in an explosion of blazing flames. As the fire dissipates, Agar casually turns away, already bored with what she sees as a concluded fight. While behind her, Siegfried collapses to his knees, coughing violently as blood spills from his mouth. His condition is devastating, his body engulfed in flames, one arm completely gone and a massive hole torn through his abdomen, leaving him barely alive. Now completely overpowered, he no longer has the strength to stand, and Agar walks back toward him, placing her foot on his head and pressing him into the ground, asserting total dominance. In his current state, he cannot even muster the strength to respond, his voice gone along with his ability to resist. Agar looks down at him with clear disdain, remarking on how predictable humans are, whether centuries ago or now, always clinging to the same heroic ideals and stubborn speeches. The once mighty sword emperor, now crushed beneath her, cannot even argue back as she tears into him with cold, dismissive words. Jiome calls out to his teacher once again, but he is still barely able to move, completely powerless to do anything that could save him. Agar, who had almost forgotten about him, shifts her attention back toward him after hearing his cry. For the first time since they met, she calls him by his name, and walks toward him, continuing the conversation they had before Siegfried arrived. Now that the interruption has been dealt with, she calmly states that it is time to give him the result of the test she had given him earlier. The Sword Emperor tries desperately to shout at his student to run, but it is already too late. Jiome has passed her test, and instead of freedom, his reward is another wave of mind control. His already weakened mind can barely resist as the Legion commander places her flaming hands on his body. In her eyes, Jiome is the perfect vessel, someone who can carry the hopes of demon kind as an ideal host. With a gentle and almost affectionate tone, she tells him that they will meet again in hell. Behind her, Siegfried continues to shout, warning her not to turn her back on the enemy just to go after a young cadet, but Agar simply laughs at him, completely dismissing his words as she prepares a seal on her tongue. She has no interest in dealing with an old man like Siegfried anymore, and her focus remains entirely on Jiome. She leans closer and presses her tongue against his forehead, marking him with a devil's seal as proof that he passed her test. The moment the mark is placed, Jiome collapses to the ground, his body going limp as if he has been completely taken over by her power. The demonic mark begins to spread from his head, slowly covering his entire body as her influence fully takes root within him. At the same time, the system detects the intrusion as an unauthorized external force and immediately reacts, attempting to activate its self-defense program. However, just like with the Sword God's blessing, the program fails to execute because the user's level and the current world line are too low. Instead of stopping the intrusion directly, the system uses Yggdrasil as a catalyst to temporarily boost Geoma's level. It then activates its restraint function to readjust and synchronize the world line. If you have no idea what this means, dear viewer, it means that our OMK is about to get absolutely busted and Agar is cooked. As this process continues, Geoma's synchronization rate begins to rise rapidly, jumping from 12.7% all the way up to 99%. And then finally reaching 100%. With that, the conditions for unlocking his mysterious sealed power are fulfilled, and Geoma is on the verge of waking up. Meanwhile, Siegfried continues trying to fight against the overconfident demon, but in his battered and heavily weakened condition, he can barely pose any real threat. His movements have clearly slowed down, yet even Agar can't help but acknowledge that he is still moving despite the extent of his injuries. Still, it isn't something she finds too surprising, comparing him to a bug that keeps twitching even after its head has been cut off. Even so, Siegfried refuses to stop and keeps pushing forward, attempting to strike her, while Agar casually and almost playfully dodges every attack he throws at her. No matter the cost, even if it means sacrificing his own life, he is determined to take her down with him. His blade begins to shine as his aura flares up, and Agar immediately notices the color of it. It reminds her of the same aura used by the Sword Saint during the war 700 years ago. His aura surges intensely, clearly a final effort driven by what little life he has left, and Agar realizes that she cannot afford to let him continue any longer. If she allows him to push any further, he could become a genuine threat. Without hesitation, she charges forward to end things in one decisive clash, and Siegfried steadies himself, preparing to meet her head-on for one last battle. However, before either of them can make their move, everything is suddenly interrupted as a powerful blast of magic descends from above, crashing down onto Agar and shaking her violently. The impact rattles her completely, forcing her to turn sharply as a snarl spreads across her face while she searches for the source of the attack. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. The moment her eyes land on the figure approaching, her expression shifts instantly, her eyes widening in shock. For a brief moment, she thinks she is looking at Geoma, but she immediately realizes that this cannot be the same boy. An ancient and deeply unpleasant chill runs through her entire body as she stares at the glowing figure moving toward them, a presence she hasn't felt in over 700 years. At that moment, the system forcefully amplifies and manifests the levels of all of Geoma's blessings, including the blessing of painlessness and the blessing of regeneration. Then, through the blessing of transference, it uses those abilities to suppress and stabilize the pain and damage affecting the world line itself. A low growl escapes Agar as she fixes her gaze on the being that dared to interfere with her plans, her voice tightening as she calls out to the figure in the sky above them. Joquin, Geoma then descends from the sky toward them, but the blessing of the Sword God is now temporarily disabled. In its place, the system makes an announcement, declaring that the gods themselves should bear witness as he now wields the blessing of pseudo-invocation. Elsewhere on the island, Abel walks through the dense forest with her sword resting against her back, moving steadily as the final day of the training exercise begins. Yet with each step, a strange sense of unease settles over her, something clearly feeling off. It is already close to 7:00 inches the morning, and at another part of the island, Ryozo checks her phone, her face filled with disbelief as she notices something unusual. Speed Weapon wakes up behind her and questions why she is already up and walking around when it is supposedly not even dawn yet. But she immediately corrects him, telling him that dawn had already passed long ago. Despite that, the sky remains completely dark, as if it were still the middle of the night, with no sign of sunrise at all. Regardless of this unnatural situation, it is already time for the cadets to start heading back to the academy, as everyone is supposed to regroup at the return point, including Chloe and Rachel, who are still asleep, both dreaming about Kang Jeoma. Other cadets across the island also begin waking up, realizing that it is time to gather and leave. Ryozo tightens her grip on the strap of her bag, a strong sense of certainty forming in her chest that something about all of this is seriously wrong. Back at the battlefield, thick smoke continues to swirl through the air without clearing as Jeoma slowly descends, floating down calmly. Agar's thoughts spiral as she struggles to process what she was seeing, unable to believe that Jokwon could suddenly appear in front of her. For the first time, the faint fear that Siegfried had noticed in her eyes completely takes over her expression. But as Jeoma's feet finally touch the ground, electricity crackling around him, she gets a clear look at his face and realizes that this is not Jokwon at all. It is Jokwon, the same boy she had been toying with just minutes ago. Realizing her mistake, she understands that it was foolish to think that Jokwon could still be alive after 700 years, since no matter how strong he once was, he was still human. Even so, that realization does nothing to stop the overwhelming sense of dread washing over her as Jeoma approaches. The feeling is so intense that her normally sharp and calculating mind begins to slow down, clouded by an unfamiliar fear. Meanwhile, Siegfried can do nothing but stare, his breath caught in his throat as he watches, almost as if witnessing the emergence of a god. As soon as Jeoma steps close enough, Siegfried's knees give out, and he instinctively kneels in respect. Jeoma looks at him briefly before raising his hand, and in that instant, Siegfried's wounds begin to heal rapidly, knitting themselves back together as if they had never been there. Once Siegfried has recovered, Jeoma closes his eyes for a moment, focusing, and when he opens them again, a surge of raw power bursts outward from his body. Electricity erupts around him, spreading across the entire area, and in the next moment, he vanishes. Before Igar can even react, he reappears behind her and begins walking toward her calmly. She stands completely frozen, unable to process what just happened, her mind failing to grasp his movements, or even his presence. It feels as if his very existence has become something beyond her comprehension. She briefly considers whether it is because of the weak body she is inhabiting, but quickly realizes that it is far more than that. At that moment, she becomes certain of one thing. The being standing before her is no longer human. Accepting this, she withdraws her earlier words and apologizes, immediately preparing for a decisive attack as she draws magma from deep within the earth. The ground cracks open as molten energy rises, gathering in front of her before forming into a massive fireball that she lifts above her head. Siegfried watches with wide eyes and clenched teeth, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the power she was unleashing. Meanwhile, Jeoma remains completely calm, showing no emotion as he observes the growing inferno. Agor then hurls the enormous fireball toward Jeoma, bidding him farewell and promising that they will meet again in hell. The massive sphere tears through the ground as it flies, its size so overwhelming that Siegfried can only watch in horror, unable to do anything to stop it. Jeoma, however, simply steps forward, walking directly toward the incoming destruction. For the first time since his transformation, he speaks, while within him, the system rapidly calculates the situation. The world line is unstable, and this current form can only be sustained for 60 seconds. But for what he intends to do, even that short time is more than enough. As the world seems to hold its breath, he continues forward, his focus entirely on cutting the fireball perfectly. Countless possible cutting paths appear before him, but his gaze locks onto a single precise line. He activates a new ability, Cosmic Blade, and in one smooth motion, his will slices forward, cutting not only through the fireball, but extending far beyond it, reaching Agor where she stands with her arms still extended. The fireball explodes in a blinding flash that engulfs everything in white light, and when it fades, Agor's body collapses, cleanly split into two by a flawless cut. She falls to the ground with no strength left, her blood spreading like molten magma as her mana core, the source of her existence, has been completely severed. As she lies there dying, she looks up toward the sky, and across the island other cadets instinctively look upward as well, shocked by what they see. The unnatural darkness covering the sky has been sliced open by a perfect cut, allowing the morning sunlight to finally break through. None of them understand what just happened, and instead, they simply assume that the sunrise on this island is strangely abnormal. Back on the battlefield, Giome's transformation begins to fade away. The overwhelming power leaving his body as suddenly as it came, and without that strength sustaining him, he collapses to the ground unconscious. Seeing this as her final opportunity, the Legion commander drags herself forward, refusing to accept such a miserable end. More than anything, she now realizes that Kang Gioma will grow into a disaster for all of demonkind, and with the last remnants of her strength, she begins preparing one of the most powerful weapons. In the final spell to finish him off, before she can complete it, her movement is abruptly halted, as a sword pierces straight through her head from behind, the blade bursting out through her mouth. Siegfried stands above her, his expression cold and unyielding as he reminds her that he had already warned her never to turn her back on an enemy. He channels his aura into the blade, and her final screams of resistance are silenced as her body begins to decay, breaking apart until nothing remains. As the last traces of her existence disappear, Siegfried finally speaks into the empty battlefield, declaring that his name is not Aaron's descendant, but Siegfried von Nibelung. After that, he turns his attention to the unconscious Gioma and carefully checks his condition. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. His breathing is stable, and there are no fatal injuries, meaning his life is not in immediate danger. However, as Siegfried looks at him, a question lingers in his mind about what Gioma truly is. He recalls how his own body reacted earlier, how he had instinctively knelt without thinking, as if compelled by something beyond his control. It was not a conscious decision, but a deep instinct ingrained within him as a swordsman. Since ancient times, humanity has believed that there exists an incomprehensible will within all things, phenomena like storms, comets, and lightning appearing out of nowhere, forces that surpass human understanding. These overwhelming powers have always been feared, yet at the same time revered. Over time, people began giving them names, calling such existences calamities or even gods. And with that, we've reached the end of this recap and the first season of this manhwa. Honestly, I don't even know what score to give this manhwa. Gioma's journey has been incredible, full of ups and downs, and that fight was just epic. But now, I want to hear from you. What did you think? Let me know your rating from 0 to 10 inches, the comments below, and tell me what your favorite part was. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. As the students move toward the exit gate, the ones closest to the MC push their way forward through the crowd. Ryozo arrives right on time to witness the height of the chaos, just as Gioma is being carried away on a stretcher. On her left, she notices Chloe desperately trying to force her way to Gioma's side, while Rachel holds her back. On her right, Abel drops to her knees after realizing that her grandfather has lost an arm. It was clear that something had taken place, and it was extremely serious. By the following day, both the news and the internet are flooded with speculation about what exactly happened in Avalon that left one student on the brink of death, and the Sword Emperor missing an arm. With the massive loss of power caused by Siegfried's injury, the entire world can only wonder if someone new might rise among the 7-star heroes. As Ryozo scrolls through different news sites, she unsurprisingly finds no information about Gioma. Meanwhile, the other students whisper among themselves, questioning why the special student hasn't been seen and what really happened to him on Avalon Island. Their talk becomes too grim for Ryozo's liking, so she calmly tells them to be quiet and go gossip somewhere else. Even though they are discussing the possibility that Gioma might die from his injuries, Ryozo is certain that someone like him wouldn't go down that easily. Chloe, however, hasn't stopped crying since the last day they saw him. At this point, more than a week has passed since any of them have seen Gioma, so it's only natural for worry to start setting in. When they attempted to visit him in the medical bay, they were refused entry despite being cadets just like him. The order came directly from Director Media, which suggested that the situation was connected to the Sword Emperor. After they completed their special exam, Avalon Island had transformed into a sea of boiling lava, with a strange and ominous layer of mana covering the entire area. Combined with the fact that humanity's strongest had lost his left arm, the only logical conclusion was that a demon or demonoid had invaded the island. Ryozo quickly reached that conclusion and immediately started searching for any information about it, but she found nothing at all. On top of that, Director Media had cut off all communication with the outside world, insisting that she would handle everything herself, meaning even the media couldn't obtain any new details. Because of that, there is nothing Ryoso can do to help Gyoma, and that reality frustrates her. Adding to her frustration, the last time she saw him, he had flicked her on the forehead, and now she's left worried about him, while also wanting payback. In another class, Rachel and Aval have their own discussion about everything that happened. Aval, in particular, is deep in thought, reflecting on what happened to her grandfather. Fortunately, he is safe and even expected to make a full recovery aside from his arm, of course. But that isn't what's troubling her. When she visited him in the infirmary, she discovered that he was personally taking care of Gyoma, though he refused to explain why. Every time she hears something about Gyoma, there always seems to be some kind of mystery surrounding him, and now it appears he was injured while helping her grandfather. Elsewhere, Claudia Bim harked down an entire bottle of whiskey out of frustration. Everything is becoming more complicated for him, and none of his plans are going the way he intended. To make matters worse, even the undertakers he had hired never came back. Medea, on the other hand, is just as frustrated, though for completely different reasons. Sitting inside her office, she has a conversation with the Sword Emperor about Gyoma's condition. Not long ago, Gyoma had been severely injured, yet now he is somehow in even better condition than he was before the incident. It makes sense that he recovered so quickly since Medea had assigned the best medical officials to treat him. However, Siegfried is a completely different matter. Despite having lost an arm, he appears perfectly fine. Even the doctor who treated him cannot explain how Siegfried managed to recover from everything, including the illnesses he had prior to going to Avalon. All of this only gives Medea a headache, as she cannot figure out what is going on. On top of that, Siegfried has been behaving strangely, and has not left Gyoma's side throughout his recovery. Now that Gyoma has finally woken up, she hopes Siegfried will at last explain what really happened. Siegfried himself has also been trying to organize his thoughts, since a lot truly happened on Avalon Island. Now that things have somewhat settled down, he finally begins explaining. He tells her about Igor appearing on the island, and then quickly reveals that Igor was eliminated. Medea immediately jumps from her seat in shock, because that makes no sense to her. There is no way Siegfried could have defeated Igor alone, leaving only one possible conclusion: the one who defeated Igor was Gyoma. Siegfried promises that he will explain everything in detail once everyone is together, but for now, they deserve a bit of rest. Outside in the school courtyard, Speedwhoopin tries to lift the mood of his clubmates by creating new posters to recruit members. The club had always depended on Gyoma to keep things running, but with him absent, they now have to handle things themselves. Unfortunately, the poster turns out to be incredibly ugly, and Chloe immediately tears it apart as Chloe and Speedwhoopin start arguing. Ryoso absent-mindedly touches the empty space beside her, missing Gyoma. Even the young gang she once enjoyed no longer tastes as sweet as before. While she sits there feeling down, the atmosphere suddenly shifts as Chloe and Speedwhoopin excitedly run towards someone who has just arrived. Turning her head, Ryoso sees Gyoma standing there with them. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apply. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.